Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom and today I'm going to be showing you how to create a Lightbox using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Okay, so this requires no external libraries or frameworks. It's all done using vanilla JavaScript, and this right here is our finished product. We've got this Lightbox and you can place whatever content you want inside here. I've chosen to put a photo inside mine, but you can put text, lists, buttons, whatever HTML you want, you can put inside the Lightbox. So it's very flexible in that way. Now, of course, you can then close the Lightbox by pressing in the top right corner, the little X icon. It's going to close it, and you can also just tap away and it's also going to close it. And one last thing to mention is that it's also responsive. So if I resize the window here, we can see on mobile devices, it's going to work perfectly fine. Alright, so going inside this tab right here, let's begin from scratch to create what we just saw. And also guys, the source code for this is going to be linked down below if you want to download and follow along, but let's get into the code right now. So going inside my text editor, I've got this HTML file. I've also linked up this CSS file right here, which is also empty. Okay, so the first step here is going to be to create some JavaScript files. Okay, so going inside my directory structure, let's make a new directory called Lightbox. And inside this Lightbox directory, we're going to make a new JavaScript file called lightbox.js. Okay, so this Lightbox file is going to contain the main code for the Lightbox. So basically, we're going to be writing some functions or methods inside here to activate and allow the Lightbox to be shown. Okay, the next file here is going to be called main.js, and this one is basically going to call on this Lightbox.js file to basically activate it and get everything going. Okay, so with that being said, let's go back in the HTML and just include the main.js file. We can say script. It's going to be the type of module. This is because we're going to be using the JavaScript import-export syntax to, of course, import our Lightbox.js file. We can also say source is going to go to, of course, main.js. Okay, so now the next step is going to be to actually get this Lightbox.js file working. So inside here, we're going to say export default class and call this one Lightbox. Okay, so now if you're not too sure what this export default stuff is, basically it allows you to then import this Lightbox file into this main.js file. And this class Lightbox is just going to be a container which wraps around the functions or methods we're going to be writing inside here. So that being said, let's say down here, static activate. Okay, so this is basically just a function or method, and this one here is going to be called when the page first loads, and it's going to activate the Lightbox. Okay, so part of the activation, of the Lightbox includes inserting the HTML for the Lightbox inside the body of our page. Okay, so going back inside here, we're going to say document.body.insert adjacent HTML. We're going to say here before end, then using the backticks on my keyboard, I'm now going to be able to use multi-line JavaScript strings. So inside here now, I'm going to say something like, let's just do dcode. Okay, so now when this function gets ran, we expect that this HTML or this text gets inserted before the end of the body right here. So if we go inside my main.js file, let's now call that function. I'm going to say import Lightbox from Lightbox/Lightbox, then say .js. Okay, now we can just say Lightbox.activate. So now, of course, when the page first loads up, we're going to activate the Lightbox. Going back in the browser, we're going to refresh now. We can see that we get dcode right here before the end of our HTML body. So that's working fine. The next step is going to be to, of course, change this decode text to the actual HTML for the Lightbox. Okay, so when it comes to the Lightbox, we're going to be doing this one step at a time. So let's make a new div here with a class of Lightbox. and an ID of also Lightbox. Okay, so this one here is going to be the main container for the entire Lightbox. It's going to be that black opaque background. So if I save this, then go inside the CSS, let's target that class of Lightbox. So for this one, we're going to be saying a position of fixed. This means that basically it's going to be visible on top of everything else on the page, and when you scroll down, it's going to remain on top. We're now going to say a top of 0 and a left of 0, as well as a width of 100 VW and a height of 100 VH. So these two here just make sure that the Lightbox takes up the entire width and height of the page. We can now say background and make this RGBA 0, 0, 0 and then 0.5 for 50% opaque black. I can now save this and go back in the browser. I can refresh and we get this right here. So we get that black background. The next step now is going to be to allow the content inside the Lightbox to be centered vertically and horizontally. So going back inside here, let's put some content inside the Lightbox. We can just say, for example, dcode. Okay, so let's now go back in the CSS. So if I just refresh the page real quickly here, just to demonstrate, top left corner. Okay, if I go back in the CSS, we're going to say display, make this flex, and align items of center, and justify content of center. So now these three properties are going to make sure that the dcode or the content inside the box is going to be centered, and there we go. The last step here for the Lightbox CSS is going to be to say box sizing of border box and a padding of 15px, and these two here are going to ensure that as we go down to smaller screen sizes, we're always going to have some space between the edges of the browser. So if I refresh this and then resize the window down, we can see that we always have 15px of padding along the edges. Okay, so that is what we need to do in terms of CSS for the Lightbox class. The next one here, if we go back inside the in the JavaScript, we need to now specify a new div, okay, with a class of Lightbox __ inner. So this div right here basically represents the inner section of the Lightbox where all the content and the close button goes. So inside here now, we can make a new button with a type of button and a class of Lightbox __ close. And inside this button, we're just going to say ampersand, then times, semicolon. So this here is going to give us an HTML entity, a little times or X icon. Okay. Then down here, we can say div with a class of Lightbox __ content. Okay, so this is where essentially all of your main Lightbox content goes. So for example, I can say this is the main content. If I save this, go back in the browser, refresh, we get something like this. So now we need to style these up to make it look like the example. So going back in the CSS, we're going to be targeting now the Lightbox __ inner class. So for the inner section containing the X or the close button and the main content, we're going to say position relative. So this here allows us to very soon position the X in the top right corner. We're going to say a width of 100% and a max width of 800px. So you can make this whatever you like. This just basically means that the Lightbox inner section is going to always try to be 100%, but it's going to cap at 800px. This makes sure the Lightbox is responsive. Okay, a background here of white, very straightforward, and lastly a box shadow of 0, 0, 25px RGBA 0, 0, 0 and then 0.3. If I save this here, go back in the browser, refresh, we get something like this, and there we go. We can see that it caps at 800px, but of course it's also going to support resizing down. Okay, next up, let's style up the close button. Back inside here, we're going to target the Lightbox __ close So now we're going to say background and make this none just to remove the default background applied to buttons. We're going to say a border of none, an outline of none also, and a position of absolute. So combining this absolute position with this position relative, it allows us to now say a top of 0, a right of 0. If I now save this here and go back in the browser, we can see that upon refreshing, it's in the top right corner of the Lightbox inner content. Okay, right down there. Next up, if we go back, we're going to be applying some padding. We're going to say padding 0 for the top and bottom and 10px for the left and right. Give this a font size of 40px, make it a bit larger, and a cursor of pointer. Save this, go back, and we get this right here. So we're almost there for the X button. If we go back inside here now, we're going to say a color of RGBA 0, 0, 0, and then 0.5. Okay, so just a 50% opaque black. Save this back in the browser and we get this result. So the problem here is that the main content is actually too small and the button is going over. So if you want to fix this problem, you can simply set a minimum height on your inner section. So if I go back inside here in the Lightbox inner, we can just say, for example, min height of something like 100px. Save this and go back, and we have now, of course, solved that issue. So anyway, this is also optional, guys. So you can choose to put that one in there. But the next step now after the close button is going to be to simply apply a basic hover on that close button to change the color to, well, I guess from 0.5, which we saw up here. So 0.5 goes to 0.8, making it a bit darker. So save this and go back, and now of course we have this darker shade when hovering over the close button. So we are now done with the CSS for the Lightbox. Okay, next step is going to go back in the JavaScript. All right, and for this one, once we have inserted the HTML for the Lightbox, the next step is going to be to simply get a reference to a bunch of the elements inside here. So the first one here, we're going to be getting a reference to the Lightbox itself. So we're going to say const Lightbox, okay, is equal to document.querySelector. We're going to be getting this by the ID of Lightbox, just like that. So now, of course, Lightbox down here refers to this main div right up here. We can also say const btn close equal to lightbox.querySelector. Then select the class of lightbox __ close. So basically starting from the Lightbox itself and then saying get me the first elements with the class of lightbox __ close, of course, our close button right there. Next one down here, we're going to say const content is equal to lightbox.querySelector. This time being a class of lightbox __ content for, of course, the main content of the Lightbox. Okay, so we need to now define a function which closes the Lightbox. Okay, so for this, we're going to say const close Lightbox. Inside here now, in order to close the Lightbox in this function, we're going to simply just set the display CSS property of the Lightbox to be none. Okay, so going down here, we're going to say lightbox.style.display is equal to none. Okay, we're also going to clear the content of the Lightbox. So we're going to say content.innerHTML is equal to none. Okay, so now we've defined this close Lightbox function. Let's put it to use on the btn close. So down here, we're going to say btn close .add event listener. When the close button gets clicked on, we're going to run this function. So this function inside here is simply going to now call the close Lightbox function, which we defined just up here. If I save this, go back in the browser, and I refresh, if I click on the close button, we can see that number one, the Lightbox still exists in the HTML right down here, but this time it says a display of none. but also the content in the lightbox is now gone. Of course, that relates to the inner HTML empty string. Okay, so the ways to close the lightbox includes, of course, this btn close, but also when you click on the area outside of the content, we also want it to close. So for that, if we go back down here, we're going to say lightbox.addEventListener on the mouse down event. Okay, we're going to grab the event object right there. Then we're going to say if e.target.matches lightbox. Okay, then we are going to close the lightbox. So I want to just comment out this if statement to demonstrate what it means. So if we just said when you mouse down on the lightbox, close it. Okay, let's save this and go back and see what happens. So refresh this. If I click on the outside area, it closes. There we go. But also if I click on the content area, it also closes. So that's not good. To fix that, we've got this matches code. So if I just console.log the event object, save this, go back in the browser, I can now click on the, in the inner content, right? We get this mouse event. If I expand this, we can see that the target property down here is the element which we clicked on, being the lightbox inner. If I refresh once again, then click away, this time the target is the lightbox itself. So that is what this code here is checking. It's checking if the target matches the ID of lightbox. If it does, then we're going to close this. So now save this and go back in the browser, refresh. If I click away, it works. If I click on the content, it does no longer work. So that is why we need that code right there. And we are now basically done with the activate method. The next one down here is going to allow us to then actually show the lightbox. But before we do that, we need to, by default, make the lightbox hidden. So down here, we're going to say a style, a display of none. So now on page load, the lightbox is going to be hidden. Okay, we can also remove this main content as it was just an example. Get rid of this right here, save it, and then minimize the activate method, refresh the page, and it is now not there by default. So now we can just simply write a function or method which allows us to activate, or not activate, but show the lightbox. Make a new method down here called show. This will take through HTML or an element. Okay, so we're going to be seeing what this means very shortly, but inside this show method, we can just say const content is equal to document.querySelector. We can select the ID of lightbox, then we can say .lightbox content. Okay, so basically we're just getting once again the main lightbox content div which we specified up here. So once we have the content, I'm just going to let's just console.log the actual element just for demonstration purposes. Let's go back in the main.js and take a look at the usage of that show method. So if you want to show your lightbox, you simply say lightbox.show. You pass in here, for example, something like if I just do an unordered list, okay, I can just say something like li, and I can just say dcode, for example. So that's my HTML which I want to appear inside the lightbox. If I save this, go in the browser, refresh, we of course on page load, because we're calling it straight away, we of course are activating that function, so we get the lightbox content as we logged out right down here. So next step is going to be to actually grab this unordered list or whatever it is that's inside here and then put it inside the content. Very straightforward. We can just say firstly document.querySelector, selecting the lightbox once again. We can just say .style.display is equal to null. So this is just going to reset where we've set display none, whether it's done through here or down here when it gets closed. Basically, it's going to remove that display property and show the lightbox. So if I save this, go back in the browser, refresh, we can see that it is now once again visible with no content. Okay, so next step, very straightforward. We're going to say content.innerHTML is equal to HTML or element, of course this being the actual list which we passed in. Save this, back in the browser, refresh, and we have the unordered list inside the Lightbox content. Okay, so what does this HTML or element, mean? So for this, we're also going to allow here, we're going to allow you to pass through an HTML element object. Okay, so if for example, we say down here, const my button equal to document.createElement. Okay, then I say button. Then I can just say my button.text content is equal to something like click me. Okay, so of course this right here is just an example of an HTML element object. We then pass through my button into the show method. We now expect this button to appear in the lightbox. Okay, so to make that work, we have to check and we have to say if type of HTML or element is equal to the string. Okay, so if you pass through a string here as opposed to this button, so if I just do this for example, this is a string version, then of course HTML element version. So if you pass to a string, going to use this content inner HTML line which we used earlier. Else, if it is an HTML object, okay, we just say content.innerHTML. We're going to clear this out. Then we can just say content.appendChild. We're going to be appending the HTML or element which we passed in. Save this by passing in this button. Refresh the browser. We have the button inside the Lightbox window. And that is how to create a Lightbox using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If today's video helped you out, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.